Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so excited about. It is a recommendation style video, but a very special one. And that is going to be hyper specific fantasy book recs. That's right, over on Instagram, I asked y'all, what are some really specific fantasy books that you are looking to add to your shelves or to your TBRs? I've compiled quite the stack of books to hopefully answer your very needed recommendations. But before we dive into the books themselves, first a word from this video's sponsor, which is Billy. I'm so excited to be partnering up with Billy today, not only because I'm a huge fan of their products, but I also just love the ethos that surrounds their company. Billy was essentially founded with the desire to abolish the pink tax in the self-care and shaving space. They noticed that women were being charged 10 to 15% more on average for things that weren't even designed for them. That's why Billy came out with their own razor and products that you can buy and get sent directly to your door. We love convenience. Billy also is all about basically celebrating how you want to present yourself to the world. They make self-care products if you're wanting to shave every day or once every 6 months. No matter how you want to deal with your own hair is ultimately up to you. They just want to make sure that you have the products you need to make the experience wonderful. That being said, today I'm going to be specifically talking about the Billy Starter Pack, which is only $10. I've actually been using all these products, but I packed everything back up so I can show you everything you get within your starter pack, your razor, as well as a little magnetic holder that you basically put in your shower, keeping everything clean and rust free. You also get a change of head as well. Again, all for only $10. And if you guys are looking to revamp your self-care routine, I truly highly recommend Billy. I find them to be so smooth on the skin. They glide effortlessly, and they're also really lightweight, ensuring that I personally don't put too much pressure and irritate my skin. I have incredibly sensitive skin, and I have tried so many different things, resulting in some not great experiences, but Billy, for me personally, works fantastically. Again, quick reminder that body hair is 100% normal, and how you personally want to deal with that body hair is ultimately completely up to you. There should be no pressure in how you actually want to approach that. That is the key to not only the sponsorship, but also Billy as a brand. If you guys are interested in wanting to add Billy into your self-care routine, again, I highly recommend checking out the $10 starter kit because it's a fantastic deal, way cheaper than anything you'd be able to find at a drugstore, but with a much higher quality. Again, I'll have a link to their site down below, as well as a link if you want to shop this very special offer. A big shout out to Billy for sponsoring this video, but let's go ahead and dive back into the fantasy recommendations. Alrighty, as I said, this is a hyper specific book rec, so I have a lot of requests for recommendations, and again, that I sourced on Instagram. I'm gonna try to give as much information about the book as I can, but also try to keep this a bit snappy. And the first request is a queer AF fantasy that isn't love story centric. So it can have romantic elements, but it isn't necessarily the star of the show. And for this, I actually have two recommendations. The first is the Foundry Side series by Robert Jackson Bennett. This houses quite a few queer characters, but centers a female-female relationship. The evolution of not only their love is one of my favorite aspects to this otherwise breakneck fantasy story, but I really want to emphasize that while this book is full of so many characters you will become obsessed with, this is a very intense kind of underdog takes on a much larger power story. It also has incredible world building and a very intense magic system. This is through and through a fantastic high fantasy story that also has queer romance and lots of queer characters. One of my favorite trilogies that is also now complete. So if you're wanting to binge it, I highly recommend doing so. And my tagline for this book is basically quirky crew trying to pull off an impossible heist with also a magic system that is magical coding. If any of that sounds interesting to you, you've got to read this. Next up, I also have Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is a sci-fi necromancer story, and we follow our main character Gideon, who is queer, and there's also another female-female based relationship in this. This is a wild ride of a story, and Gideon anchors it so unbelievably well, full of twists and turns, full of intergalactic hijinks, let's call it. This basically follows our main characters as they partake in a political competition that sort of turns into a closed door thriller murder mystery where they're all kind of dying off slowly one by one. And there's also, again, necromancy at the heart of it. It has so much incredible banter within it as well. The dialogue and the characters in this will have you laughing out loud. Again, another fantastic queer fantasy sci-fi story. Next up is a recommendation for a grumpy old character has to go on a quest with like a charming young main character. And this combination is also one of my favorites. I feel like it creates such a delightful bond by the end of the story. Kind of unlikely people entering each other's lives. It's great. For this, I'm actually going to go with Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is another sort of motley crew of a book following a variety of characters kind of going on a quest to try to save the main character's sister from a loveless marriage. One of the pairings of this book, though, is basically an old bone witch who hasn't really left her residence in many years, decides to follow the main character and help her. This older woman also has a demonic chicken. It just creates for so many hilarious and endearing scenarios. I love this fairy tale quest-centered story. It has so much to offer, but it also has that sort of plot element to it, so this would be one that I'd recommend for that. Next up is a book that has a brooding man reluctantly taking on parental role, basically like The Last of Us or The Mandalorian or just anything Pedro Pascal has been in recently. I actually have a recommendation, but it is a brooding woman reluctantly taking on a role with a younger character, and that is from the Hunger of the Gods series by John Gwen. This is another multi-POV Viking-esque fantasy story, and one of our main characters, Orca, is actually on a quest to try to find her lost son, but you see her throughout the series find companions of some younger boys who basically stick to her side like burrs. She constantly tries to get rid of them, but slowly you begin to see their relationship evolve throughout the series. It's a charming element to an otherwise very dark and grim book and story, but Orca is by far one of my favorite characters in fantasy right now. She's so capable. She's such a force, and seeing her determination to try to save her son and also kind of collect wayward individuals along the way is fantastic. Next up is a book that will make me feel like I'm walking through a dense forest in the dead cold of winter. Obviously, I have to go with The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is a historical fantasy story set in like 15th century Russia. The first book will make you feel cold to your bones. It's set in a small, remote village in the Russian wilderness during the winter, following a young girl who's taking on a magical force in hopes of saving her family. One of my all-time favorite trilogies, one of the best like nature-infused fantasy stories I feel like that are out there. So if you're looking for a very cold winter read, this is a perfect one to pick up. Next is soft fantasy plus drama period romance piece. And for this, I'm going to recommend Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is the first book to a Fae Regency romance series, and it's honestly incredibly delightful. Basically, each book follows a new main character, and there's a touch of Fae and magic involved, but it also has the propriety and sort of historical romance tropes that you know and love as well. This leans more on the cute side of the steamy scale, if that makes sense, but our main character is basically cursed by the Fae as a child, and present day you see her sort of entering society and gets wrapped up with a grumpy Lord Sorcerer. It's delightful. It also has many books out, so it's a great one to read and marathon. Next is a book that is whimsical yet creepy. And for this, I'm going to recommend Pure Nessie by Susanna Clark. This is probably one of the weirdest books I've read recently. The entire time, you kind of have no idea what in the world is going on, and trying to unpack the plot is kind of the point of the book. But outside of that, it is one of the most atmospheric and beautiful books I've also read in a long time. It's a short book that packs quite the punch, very strange, very haunting, and I feel like a perfect whimsical but dark read. On the same sort of vein as that, someone else is looking for a book where you don't know what's going on through the whole book with a vague ending, and I gotta go with Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death. I thought the last book was weird. This kind of brings it to an entirely new level, but it works fantastically. This is a story that sort of switches off between our two main characters. The first is a writer who's obsessed with death, and the other is Death herself, working class Black woman who is tired and is starting to kind of tell her stories to our other main character. But this is by no means a straightforward book. The narrative style is constantly shifting. The writing style shifts. You're reading sometimes stories of the past, shifting then to poetry. Lines between our main characters also begin to blur. This is a very dark read. It's also one that sort of takes over you as you're reading it and leaves you breathless by the end, but it's not one that has any clear like narrative thread or resounding resolution by the end. It's more about the experience. It's very atmospheric. It's saying a lot, don't get me wrong. Like, it's a very interesting book through and through, but it's definitely one that is more blurry around the edges. It's not like a concrete, this is the beginning, middle, and end type of story. It's one that's going to be like, what in the world did I just pick up when you finish it? But it's also one that I think you'll give like 4 or 5 stars at the same time. So definitely a weird, vague book that's also fantastic. Next is a fantasy with lovable characters on an adventure with some fun drama D&D style. So I'm gonna recommend The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Bowman. Honestly, Christopher Bowman's other book, which is Between Two Fires, is another unlikely quest story bringing together strange main characters, but this is probably my favorite of the two. But in this story, we're introduced to our main character, Kinch, who is a thief, but a thief who is in a lot of debt because to receive his thief education, he basically had to take out a large sum of gold to pay them. So Kinch is looking to make a quick buck, but unfortunately he selects the wrong target to try to steal from because she is actually a very powerful knight who fought in the previous war. Now these two characters sort of get entangled with one another and they have to go on a quest together for various reasons that get increasingly complicated as this book goes along. This book is hilarious. It is the classic fantasy trope of two unlikely characters who have literally nothing in common, who would not like each other at all if they ran into each other on the street, forced now to spend a lot of time together and go on a quest and build a begrudging friendship. It's amazing. It's so much fun. Christopher Bowman's character work is always delightful. This book does have strong horror elements in this, which I do kind of want to call out. It is gory, it is dark, but it has really funny main characters at the same time. So lots of humor and darkness, so lots of contrast as well. Next up is a fantasy with a lot of academia, so a book where you get to kind of learn alongside the main characters. I have 2 recommendations for this. The first is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is a heavily leaning academia-like fantasy story. Not only are we following a main character who is often studying and in class, there's lots of discourse on language. This book covers a lot of topics, but academia is definitely very much at the heart of the story. There's even footnotes in terms of what the author is referencing, pulled from our own history. I feel like this is probably one of the most academic leaning fantasy stories I've read in a long time. If you're looking for something with a more magic school leaning vibe, I also have The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This follows our main character Kavoth, and he's basically telling his story from the present, like in a bar. He's reflecting on his entire life. A large part of book 1 is following him in magic school, and Patrick Rothfuss goes into great detail about the discovery and the elements of this magic school, and honestly makes this book really rather fun. Obviously, I do feel like it's important to note we've been waiting for the 3rd book for eons now at this point, so maybe start this at your own risk, but if you want something with a magic school setting, this is fantastic. Next is a fantasy book with a mystery thriller component to it, and honestly, I have to shout out the book I'm currently reading because I am truly obsessed with it, and that is Empire of Exiles by Aaron M. Evans. This book is everything. It's multi-POV. There's a murder that's tied into a larger political conspiracy, a really complex political system, and just fantasy setup, interesting magic, great characters that are all very different and kind of forced to come together and work together. Lots of investigation, lots of who in the world is involved. I cannot put this book down. I have to recommend it for this because I feel like it's like my new personality trait, basically, at this point. Next is a fantasy with an animal companion in the form of a rat or other not so commonly picked animal. Great news! I have a fantasy book that has a rat fantasy companion. That is from Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I love this book. This is a delightful quest adventure story. And yes, our main character Tress's travel companion is a rat. And it's delightful and very strange, and it works very well in the whimsical nature of this book. A lot of people also asked for a pirate or seafaring-esque novel that wasn't Ship of Magic, which is another seafaring novel I really, really love. I also am going to recommend Tress of the Emerald Sea for that prompt as well. This follows Tress as she goes out into the wide world on an adventure on a ship and basically works with the entire crew. The sea itself is not made of water though, but instead spores, which is a really dangerous material, adding kind of an interesting twist to a pirate adventure story. I loved this book and I can't wait for it to be available to the general public, but it will not stop me from talking about it incessantly. even though it's technically kind of hard to get your hands on at the moment, but add it to your list. Next is a cottagecore fantasy recommendation. I have an entire video recommending cottagecore fantasy books, so I'm trying to recommend a book that wasn't included in that video, and I'm gonna go with Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. This is very whimsical, more dark leaning from a cottagecore point of view, but very, very strange and full of atmosphere and nature. It basically is set in a small town, and essentially everyone is sort of in the town tavern at the start of this book. In this tavern, they're of course telling stories, and everything is sort of disrupted when a man barges in, very injured and also holding the body of a small child in his arms. This child later in the night comes back to life. Is it a miracle? Is it magic? What in the world is going on? And from there, this entire story begins to unfold. It's like part mystery, part fairy tale. I feel like given the atmosphere and this small sort of English town setting kind of leans it to this cottagecore vibe. Again, more on the darker side of things, but one I feel like if you like The Daughter of the Forest and other books like that, this is one I also feel like you would really enjoy. Next is queer witchy book vibes, and for this I'm going to go with Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper. This is another female-female romance story with our main character being bisexual. This is a kind of small town witchy romance book with our main character coming back, trying to avoid her ex, but gets swept up with another woman in town who also has the same ex, but then they begin to have feelings for one another. It's delightful, charming, very easy and breezy, a great Halloween read, but kind of like Stars Hollow meets like revenge tale. It has a lot going for it, and it's also going to be a series, so magic, romance, friendship, small town vibes. What's there not to love? Next, I got lots of requests for a cozy fantasy story that will just make you feel all warm and fuzzy on the inside. For this, I have to go with The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Madana. I am kind of obsessed with this book right now. It was so perfect. It was like a warm hug in a book. It follows our main character who is a witch, who's also had to kind of grow up in isolation because she is a witch. But one day she receives a very mysterious invitation to become a teacher to other young witches. So she travels to this nowhere house. There she meets a hot, grumpy librarian and also gets folded into the most perfect found family scenario. The magic is great. The teaching elements of this book are great. The romance elements of this book are fantastic, but the characters and the found family is what makes this book sing. I was delighted by this. Like, if you want something that's going to make you feel so happy on the inside, you have to read this book. It is an elemental magic fantasy with a female lead, preferably adult, not YA. And for this, I'm going to go with The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. This book has so many wonderful elements to it, but from a magic system point of view, it is elemental fantasy. It's set on the Kansongi Peninsula, and here, like ice elemental magic is at the core of this community, and we follow one particular family who's very, very good at it. This book has a few main characters, but one of them is the female head of this clan, and you see her have to grapple with things like motherhood. We learn more about her past, her connection to her children, obviously, and all of this is also explored within a looming conflict. There's lots of action, lots of elemental magic combat action, but also lots of emotional turmoil as well. It truly has it all. It's fantastic. And it's not just ice elemental magic that's present in this. There's lots of other elemental magic written and included within this as well. So if you want something that has kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender combat vibes, this is a great read. Couldn't make this video without recommending this book for something, but I got lots of requests for like forest, nature-centered fantasy stories, and I just can't help but not recommend The Daughter of the Forest. Like, to me, this always immediately comes to mind for anything that is like forest, nature-centered. It's a quest story, it's a coming-of-age story, but it is just lush in its landscape writing, and honestly, you could just read anything by Juliette Marillier if you've already read the Daughter of the Forest series, but not her other works. If you're looking for something that has a lot of nature at the heart of it, a magical forest, quests, all that sort of situation, this is a great book to pick up. But I would also recommend The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. This is a fae-centered fantasy story. I feel like fae-centered stories have one of the best chances of having wonderful and beautiful nature, just given the nature of the fae realm, if you will. Lots of beautiful and lush landscapes, but also kind kind of interwoven with a lot of sinister realities too. I really enjoyed The Stolen Heir personally, and I also feel like Holly Black just writes a fae landscape so well. Really great nature, wonderful quest story as well, so you're seeing all different sorts of things. It's great. Next is a Tolkien-inspired quest, not grim dark style fantasy story, and I have to go with the Legends of the First Empire series by Michael J. Sullivan, a very recent fantasy obsession on my part, but so much about this book feels so classic. It's pastoral, it's really, really endearing, full of so many characters you will love. It's by no means grimdark. It has dark elements, like this book has lots of emotions and really complex things at play. This book has like humans, dwarves, and elves, and a very classical fantasy setup. It also has really cool magic to learn about, and I would say like it really balances being endearing while also having a gripping fantasy plot so perfectly. Alrighty guys, I have a massive pile of books over there that I need to now put away. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this video. I have many more requests for recommendations that I could pull more books off my shelf for, but for now I decided this was enough at this point for this video. Again, big shout out to this video's sponsor, which is Billy. If you want to learn more about them and check out their starter kit, it'll be in my description. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye!